Hey besties. Today we are going to talk about an influencer of a peculiar kind. Now, other people have talked about this influencer, but I want to take a different approach. I am talking to you on what would be July 29th in the Netherlands. And July 30th was supposed to be the day that this influencer was supposed to, we'll say, meet Susan. We are going to be using Susan as a reference and a euphemism for this. And meeting Susan will be used as a euphemism for this. So, for people who are in mental health recovery, please keep in mind we will be talking about Susan a lot. Ideations of Susan, meeting Susan, and people who have met Susan. We will also be talking about other mental health disorders. So keep that in mind. Trigger warning, trigger warning. I'm not going to be sugarcoating very much else after this, okay? This influencer is Joseph awuah-darko, who goes by OKuntaKinte's on Instagram. Joseph is an artist from Ghana, and he was doing an art project immediately before this that was about, the colors and how he is dealing with his bipolar disorder through through colors. That's what he was known for, and kind of making them like kente cloth. Hence his name being OKuntaKinte. That's what the connections that I'm making. It's not on his page, but that's what the thoughts are. However, Joseph in December came up with this Last Supper project because he said that he was done dealing with the effects of his bipolar disorder, and he said it was treatment resistant, and he was in the Netherlands for medically assisted meetings with Susan.
I'm tired. I'm a bit tired. I'm just so tired. I'm tired. But I think the chemical imbalance in my brain and living with bipolar disorder, it's not easy.
That's me, at one of my lowest depressive episodes. Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm bipolar, and I moved to the Netherlands.
She just simply was.
My next great adventure, age 90, is going to be dying. There's either nothing or something. And if there's something, if there's nothing, there's nothing, and that's it. If there's something, I can't think of a greater adventure than finding out what it is.
He was going to be blogging and posting about this and just taking us on the journey of him meeting Susan. And a lot of people followed it. 500,000 people follow Joseph currently. So there we go. And this is after other people have made videos about him, and they have talked about, whether it's a scam, whether it was that kind of thing. I'm not talking about that. Taking a totally different angle. I do personally believe that the content on that page is harmful. And I'm going to let you know right now that I personally feel that Joseph has not done anything to intentionally help the mental health of anybody on that page. And I believe that is actually very harmful. But he did get 500,000 followers. So I digress. Now for me, I'm taking more of a mental health perspective on this. Again, other people have made posts about it, and they've made videos about, just the scamming and stuff like that. I also want to make it very apparent that I do 100% believe that Joseph has bipolar disorder. I'm not questioning his diagnosis because I am not a therapist, and I am most importantly not his therapist, okay? So we're not talking about diagnoses. I totally understand having like a mental illness from a young age and being fucking tired by the time you're an adult. Me, I had borderline personality disorder as a kid, and did it get better? In fact, I got diagnosed at 16, just like Joseph did, but I didn't get treatment until I got older. So I understand the exhaustion. I get it. Briefly about me, Again, as I told you, I have mental illness. I got treatment and for my mental illnesses very recently. I actually went to treatment starting in February of 2023, and I have been to PHP 4 times, and I've been to IOP 6 times. PHP is a partial hospitalization program. It's like going to the psych ward in the day, and then you get to go home in the evening. So it's like a little part-time job of being in the psych ward, little part-time job as psych ward. And then IOP is where you're pretty much just only going in the evenings and you go like maybe a few times a week. So that's what I did 6 times. I did PHP 4 times. Even before that, I've made content about being very transparent about my mental health and just kind of working through things. I also have ADHD. I have stress-induced hallucinations. I've made content about that. I like to decrease the stigma around a lot of things. But what I worry about with Joseph is that this is not what the intent was, and that there's a little bit of a there's a lot of bit of a lack of accountability in his content that we're going to get into about why it's actually very harmful. Now, I did not come across Joseph recently. I started following him in January. My sister sent me his page and was like, hey, you should look at this, because at the time there were a lot of other news sites that were doing similar stories about people who were going for medically assisted meetings with Susan. Okay. And I think the New York Times had just done something, and I just got through saying on the New York Times, hey, please stop posting stuff about this, because it makes it seem like this is an option for people when we really need to be advocating for accessible treatment. So that is just my stance on this. People can do what they feel like they need to do, but I am very much an advocate for we need more accessible mental health treatment, because again, as somebody who had to go check herself in to the daycare of the psych wards, I did that because I was literally not getting out of bed. I was in bed for a month. My family had to be like, you got to go back to treatment. And I did mental health stuff. And also I met Ed at some ED treatment as well. So at the time when I went into treatment, I could not fathom being on the other side of treatment. I could not fathom getting better ever. I couldn't see that that would be a possibility that I would ever get better. I wanted to cut off all my hair, and luckily my sister said, don't do that because you love your hair on a good day. You just feel really overwhelmed right now. And I was like, she doesn't know what she's talking about, but she actually did. Once I started getting treatment and getting actual medication, 180, a fog lifted. I could feel better. I've seen other people in treatment get to a place that they never thought they were going to get to. So again, I'm very much a big advocate for getting all treatments accessible to everybody, because I know treatment is not accessible to everybody. So that'll be something that I bring up again later on. Just be aware. I just also want to include this. I did send Joseph an email. I wanted to send him an email because I didn't know what kind of stuff was coming into his inbox. I also want to add that, again, I'm a mental health advocate. I am mental health first aid certified. This is new. This is something I got recently, but I've been doing that work for a really long time. I just wanted to get certified. And I'm also working to become a patient advocate and a patient liaison for people who are getting mental health treatment. So I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. And why was I saying this? I remember why I was saying this. I wanted to message him as somebody who has been through treatment and has met a lot of people who are like Joseph, because I imagine that a lot of people were saying like, don't do it. You don't need to do it, which, okay, I get it. However, as somebody who's been through treatment, and I know, again, this is something that you actually do go over mental health first aid class, we don't know if things will get quote unquote better. I actually have a video on this channel about me saying it doesn't get better, it gets different. So, and with the differences and with accessible treatment options, things get easier to deal with. Those differences you're able to understand and cope with better. So it doesn't get better, it gets different, and you're able to cope with those differences better. There we go. I want to take it from that objective standpoint, because another thing that you don't want to do when somebody is in ideation is say, you have so much to live for, stuff like that. You don't want to do that. And I assumed his inbox would be flooded with people saying, you have so much to live for, don't do it. No. If The way that you help somebody is to see if you can offer resources. That's it. Say, I appreciate you being here, offer to spend time with them, that kind of thing, but do not tell them it will get better because you don't know if you can back that up. Do not tell them you have so much to live for because you don't know them. You're not in their head, so you have no idea what they would be. I think my point is made. That intro out of the way, let me tell you about the three parts that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the harmful and dangerous way the Last Supper Project is conducted and just the premise of it. We're going to talk about his content curation and how it romanticizes uh, meeting Susan. And then we're going to talk about how the content of his content is harmful for people who are in mentally vulnerable positions, and especially those who are in ideation and seeking Susan. Okay? We're going to get into the Last Supper Project. Just when you hear the premise, you're like, oh, this is nice. He is going to go have dinner with strangers and he's going to meet so many people. And I think what most people are hoping is that through meeting all these different people from diverse backgrounds, he will then realize I have something to live for, which is what happened. It's what happened. So that's good. However, the actual premise of these is very not good. And the way that it's conducted, also not good. So let's get into why. First things first, he doesn't know who he's meeting. He doesn't know who he's meeting at all. He doesn't background check. Essentially, everybody who did the Last Supper party thing, they just signed up on Google Calendars and no vetting process, no nothing. This is a problem because the only thing we know about the people that he's meeting is that they follow him. And we have no idea why they follow him. They could be his cyber bullies, as he keeps talking about cyber bullies. They could be somebody who also wants to meet Susan. Or they could be somebody who wants to preach at him about how he doesn't need to. There are so many different variations of things. Luckily, he's met good people, and luckily, those people have been nice, which I assume they're nice because they know he's going to make content for his 500,000 followers. But for somebody who he says he wants to replicate this in other places, for us regular people, think twice because people don't know you, people don't necessarily care about you. And if the only commonality that you guys have is following somebody who was in active ideation of Susan for the better part of 8 months, you might want to ask some questions. You might want to see if you can get a background check, see if you can get to know them a little bit more before you go have dinner at their house or they have dinner at your house. Just a thought. That aside, when you think about Joseph and Joseph's platform, he's essentially an advocate for medically assisted meetings with Susan. That's what his whole page is about. His idea is that it was a relief for him because he has treatment resistant bipolar disorder, which again, I cannot emphasize enough. I totally 100% believe he has bipolar disorder. But I do also worry about either two people. What I worry about is two people meeting who both have ideations of Susan, and one person saying, hey, this is a solution I got, and I'm going to do it in this time, and the other person getting an idea of doing it when they could have gotten treatment. That's that. We don't know. You don't know who the other person is. You don't know what that person has done for treatment or hasn't done for treatment yet. So him presenting the solution as, hey, girl, hey, I'm getting medically assisted meeting with Susan. You can see why I'd be a little bit. Now, this is different than the idea that you could influence somebody to commit to a meeting with Susan, because you can't do that. Like, that's not bringing up that topic. We should definitely talk about, if you feel like somebody might be in an ideation state and they may have a plan or something like that, you should talk to them. You should bring this up. You cannot influence somebody simply by bringing it up. However, if someone is in ideation and you have a plan, we are on a different set of rules. The person who has a plan does not need to talk to the person who does not have a plan. That's the issue. So we don't know if the person that he was, actually we do know. There are people that he's met who have had terminal illnesses or chronic illnesses. There are people who he's met that have been in therapy. There are people who are watching his page who are also in therapy. So editing Diane, I just want to add really fast that there was also a time where he was volunteering at a hospice. He was removed from that position for people called and let the hospice know what his content was, but for similar reasons that I'm about to bring up, which is that people who are in the midst of contemplating Susan, or for people who are in hospice who are passing away in a not fun manner, him being around them and having this plan is not necessarily good, which is probably why the hospice let him go, because he should not be around patients who are dealing with chronic pain, because he is seemingly, again, a spokesperson for a way to escape that. So, yeah. Him presenting this and being essentially, like I said, a spokesperson for this as an option is dangerous. Which brings me to my next point, that none of his suppers are ever mediated or facilitated by a mental health professional. Now, the last supper parties that he does with individual people, okay, you're going to their house to have dinner. That's dangerous. You're probably going to talk about the fact that you're getting a medically assisted meeting with Susan, and that's a little. However, what he also does is, I think it's called the fucked up people parties or something like that, which is when people come en masse to have dinner with him that his friend Illy and him prepare. That needs to be mediated by a mental health professional. Why? It's a room full of people who just want to talk to Joseph. That's all they want to do. That's all they know that they want to do, is they want to talk to Joseph and get to know Joseph, and they all know his story. And that sounds like a recipe for not a good meal. Essentially, it's a whole bunch of people who are possibly, again, in varying states of mental health and mental illness. You don't know. All you do is you know that they have the commonality of meeting a person who they know is going to have a medically assisted meeting with Susan. And what happens is Joseph will inevitably tell his story of having treatment-resistant bipolar disorder. This will trigger other people who have similar issues to talk about their stuff. Then you get a whole bunch of people in the room who are like, oh, I feel so, I can relate to this, I can relate to that. And then we all relate back to Joseph. There has to be somebody in the room who facilitates like where this conversation is going, so other people don't get activated to make a plan. Hey, it's editing Diane. I was looking for screenshots of the fucked up individuals dinner to add to the video just for visual aid. And honestly, I was hypothesizing in the video, but I should have been more serious, because when I go and I look up the fucked up individuals dinner, it's a dinner for six people in addition to Illy and Joseph, but there are rules, and those rules are problematic. So one of the rules is that crying is like mandatory. I think they said crying is communion. Then they say something like one meltdown is like mandatory for you to be there. If you haven't melted down, if you haven't been derailed or something like that, you're the narc, which I do not enjoy the casual use of narcissist and narc, because that is a disorder, not just like a word anymore. Also, big thing is that they say triggers are not taboo, which is okay if you're in a place where everybody is of the same mental capacity. They're at the same level of mental vulnerability is what I should say, and they can handle conversations about triggers. But if you don't have a professional there talking about the essay that you experienced when you were 16, may not be the best idea. Talking about how your, abuse that you may have seen in your childhood and stuff like that is not a good idea if we're not using trigger or euphemistic language. And I get that there's this edgy need to be like, this is not a safe space. But when you're dealing with a mentally vulnerable population, who again, all they know about Joseph is that he has a plan to meet Susan, and there are other people who may also be in varying places of this. It's very reckless, it's very careless, and it's not thoughtful, and it's not good for your followers. It's not okay. That's the whole thing. Again, if you think somebody is in the process of meeting Susan, you should talk to them. However, a person who has a plan should not be talking to someone who has ideations, because that could speed up whatever plan they didn't have. That could solidify a plan that they didn't have previously. So somebody has to be there. I say this also because in treatment, we have process group. Process group is a time for people to share. You have group therapy groups. You know what the commonality in both of those things are? There's a therapist there. There is somebody who is at least trained in some element of therapy, psychology, social services to know how to steer that conversation. When you have process groups, you have people who tell you, hey, the rules are we're not going to talk about this. We will use language like target behaviors as opposed to saying what we did. Why? Because if you talk about what said target behaviors are, you can trigger somebody else in the room. If I'm not doing a behavior and I'm 3 weeks clean of doing behaviors, but then somebody comes in the group and they talk about the behaviors they just did last night, it can trigger me to also want to do behaviors. And we're just in a room having dinner, or we're on Zoom having dinner, and we're all talking about the different behaviors that we've done over the years. Not a good look. We'll get into some more things later on, but the last issue that I have with the Last Supper party is that it was done disingenuously. Yes, he did meet a lot of nice people. Again, I can say that because he has 500,000 subscribers, 500,000 followers. The people who came out were nice because they wouldn't want to be responsible for whatever happens to this person who, again, has 500,000 followers. However, as I said in the beginning, you don't know who you're meeting. It could have been somebody who was a cyberbully who wanted to help him meet Susan in a different way. And he even said that. That's the whole thing. I had a sneaking suspicion. I said somebody could have met him and had very ill intentions and harmed him. And he said, I actually was using this as a passive form of self-harm. I was hoping that someone would help him meet Susan sooner. Okay, so he knew the dangers and still promoted this idea that other people should do it. And that is not okay. That's not fucking okay at all. And he slid it into a very long post. I was looking for things for this video and I saw it and I was like, this is what me and my friend have been talking about this, because we also both she went to the psych ward as well. And we were talking about this phenomenon on this page and she mentioned it. And I said, you know what, you're totally right. Somebody could have harmed him. And then I saw it and I was like, I am so angry that he is advocating for us to go out and do this as well, when he knew how dangerous it was and he was using it as a passive form of meeting Susan. Moving on from the harm that the Last Supper parties have, we need to talk about his content curation, because it is very, very curated. It looks like an angsty 16-year-old's Tumblr page who is actively in ideation. Okay, those used to pop up on Tumblr. If you were back in Tumblr in the beginning times, you know exactly the vibes that I'm talking about. First of all, I'm just going to knock something off about his content curation. My sister brought up the fact that he calls it the Last Supper party when he could have just called it a journey or something. He could have called it anything else, but calling it the Last Supper definitely makes it more of an urgency for people to want to sign up to talk to him and meet him, because they think it's going to be his last supper. And again, that kind of gives 13 reasons why writing letters kind of thing. So just something that my sister brought up, and just something to keep in mind, that even the fact that he phrases it the Last Supper party is also a part of that content curation that is, again, romanticizing meetings with Susan. Another thing that I noticed about his content is, again, he was very famous for doing these very colorful paintings. And then once he decided that he was doing the Last Supper party, boom, everything was black and white. There's a little bit of a bridge for maybe a week, a couple weeks, and then boom, we're black and white. And that could just be a reflection of his own inner mental state. I get it. When I'm mentally unwell, the last thing I want to do is be colorful. So I'm not going to hold against him. I'm just going to say going from color to black and white does, again, paint a very angsty artist aesthetic that is not good when we're trying to maybe not persuade people that, meeting Susan is such it's like a cool thing. It's like a cool thing. That's the vibe and energy that having his whole page be black and white and nice and curated does. Another thing that I want to point out, because you may be like, Diane, this is not curated. I really want to point out the fact that he has the same crying photo as thumbnails on a lot of videos. I started going through his page, and I'd be like, hey, didn't I see that video before? No, I didn't. It's a different video, and it's a similar picture for it's a still image from one of the first few videos he made after he debuted the Last Supper project, and it's stills from those videos, and he'll use that still on the thumbnail of another video, and that video will have nothing to do with the still image. Like maybe he's crying because he's happy, maybe he's crying because he's sad. You don't know until you click the video. All you know is that you can see he's crying. So when you look at his page, it looks like he's crying kind of frequently, and then you click on the video and he's like riding on the train. I also think that's a little slimy because it's disingenuous because you weren't crying. That's just like a tiny weird thing. Like
Editing Diane again, I just want to say that another thing that I don't know why I forgot about it was the fact that he had countdowns for the first few weeks of this project. He would just have countdown pictures, and it's not good. That's all I'm going to say there. Again, adds to it being curated and romanticizing it, because why would you share your countdown with people who may or may not be contemplating meeting Susan? It's very careless. Again, also goes back to the fact that there were no mental health professionals involved with this, and I don't think that this was anyways.
Now, this is actually the major part of it. There is a very big aesthetic fixation on Anthony Bourdain and Robin Williams, mainly Anthony Bourdain. I think at this point, every 7 posts that he does has a quote of Anthony Bourdain in it. And for those of you who may not know, Anthony Bourdain was a very, very, like, he was a chef, and he was like, tough and cool and all that kind of stuff, but he did have battles with mental illness, and he did meet Susan. Robin Williams, another artist, he's a happy guy, he's a cool guy, he makes everybody laugh, and then boom, met Susan after a long battle with mental illness. So these two, I actually said to myself before I started looking at his page, I said, if I see too many pictures of Anthony Bourdain, that's a red flag for me. And boom, every 7 posts, Anthony Bourdain, Anthony Bourdain. In fact, he is rewatching Parts Unknown, and like I forgot what the books are. It's like No Reservations. He's rewatching and rereading that book, and it's a little. On one of his posts, he says it was 6 years and 11 months in 2018 when Anthony Bourdain met Susan. Why do you know that much? That's a little bit unhealthy. Now, it could be copium. It could be a way that he's coping with his process. But again, this is feeding into this curated content of like, meeting Susan is like super aesthetic, super cool, super chill. Like, we're all trying to meet Susan. Like, that's the vibe that you get when you see Robin Williams and you see Anthony Bourdain, and you see, this is another thing. He has posts that say, stuff I read, quote that I read so that I don't want to myself. A video I watch every morning so I don't myself. There's also a few posts where he's like, hey, let's honor the artists who have also met Susan this year, which on the surface seems like it's a good thing because he's raising awareness. However, he's not doing it to raise awareness. This is, again, a part of this aesthetic that, artists were troubled. We meet Susan all the time. You never know. Black and white, but also Anthony Bourdain. But that's the vibes. That's a vibe. I'm sorry if that makes you a little bit annoyed, but like it's a very posh, it's very sleek, it's a very romantic looking way of talking about this. And it's irresponsible. Now that I've kind of gone into like the more of the content, I'm going to just go ahead and jump into why this content is actually just harmful in general. We've talked about the curation and how the content looks and how the content looks are harmful, but let's talk about the actual, like, the nitty gritty of what he's posting. First things first, he doesn't openly advocate for people to go get therapy or any other treatment. He doesn't do that at all. He kind of quietly mentions, or every now and then will mention his therapist. He'll take pictures of his therapist or people who I think are his therapists. He recently got diagnosed with PTSD. And although I think he said that he had it before, he just didn't have a name for it. And something bad happened to him previous to all this. He was assaulted by another artist in Africa. So I don't remember what place this artist is from. I just know that they're an African artist because I saw him on another show. Regardless, he does EMDR. And if you're not affiliated with like the therapeutic approaches, if you have a trauma, CBT and going through your ABCs of like different stuff that you have going on is like a Tylenol. Like if you go to talk therapy and you and your therapist talked about like action, behaviors, consequences that led up to how a situation did, those are the ABCs of CBT. If that's what you're doing, or if you're in DBT and you're talking about dialectics and stuff like that, that is a Tylenol. That's an ibuprofen, if you will. EMDR is like the oxycodone of trauma therapy. It's going to work. We're going to pull apart situations. We're going to talk about stuck points. We're about to get in, okay? So he's doing intense trauma therapy, and what happens? He starts feeling better. He has not openly advocated for the fact that EMDR has helped him so much until recently, until it started to get down to the wire for when he would be meeting Susan. Then all of a sudden I started getting the vibe of, we're about to do the Susan is the friendship we made along the way. And he did. Now, he at the beginning said this is treatment resistant. So he is saying like, I'm not doing anything. And so his content was in line with that. We didn't really hear about anything except for the fact that he had to meet with therapists, I think, so that he could get his meeting, secured. But other than that, he kind of talked about it as if like it didn't really work or it was just somebody to talk to. He also said that the therapists were like fascinated with him and they were like, why do you still write? Like, why? Like, it's his relationship with therapy before he started doing EMDR was a little, it wasn't as serious as it could have been. And I don't think that that's okay when you have a platform of 500,000 people who, a lot of them, like people I know from treatment, are following him. And he is not advocating for any alternative therapies, any medications or anything like that, or people seeking out alternative therapies or people seeking out medications. And that's irresponsible. That's not okay. The other thing that we also have to consider is that he doesn't talk about the negatives really in a way that looks negative. He always has a curated content post about the negatives of what is going on with him, about the negatives of maybe losing a friend. He even has a post about one of his friends dealing with Susan ideation. And it's just a nice, cute little post of the next day where she has a picture of her, a video of her, and she's smiling. It doesn't show any of like the bad nitty gritty. So for people who are on the outside looking in, who may be, again, passively ideating Susan, or people who are in recovery, it makes it look like this whole journey is not bad. And that if they could just get on that journey to meet Susan medically assisted, they would have a good time. Maybe if they have some supper parties and stuff like that. That's not okay, because I also want to let people know that one of the signs of somebody about like who may have a plan to meet Susan is them suddenly throwing parties, suddenly giving stuff away, suddenly go to meet people, suddenly checking things off their bucket list. That's a sign and a symptom of somebody moving towards actually planning. So if you get into like the feel of what his content is and you've been ideating, the good thing would be is if you're like, you know what, actually I did all this stuff and I don't want to do it, which again is what happened to him. But if you don't, this could trigger you to commit more to the meeting with Susan. Another thing that I want to bring up that is not good about his content is that the solution he offers is actually just not attainable. Most people who watch his content, see his content, cannot go to the Netherlands and meet Susan. They can't. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to go to the Netherlands to meet Susan.
I have to pay. I have to pay between like 10 to 15,000 euros to be killed, and to pursue the non-violent solution. That's how much it would cost me. The people who are putting me down non-violently, the doctors, aren't going to do it for free or for hugs and kisses.
In fact, I do believe that, number one, they've changed some of the laws, so I can't remember if they have made it so that if you're not a citizen, you can't do that. But I just want to emphasize that to move to the Netherlands long enough to get approved for this, because some people have been on the wait list for a really long time, to be there long enough, you would have to move. And that costs money. And if I looked it up a little bit, it's like, I think $10,000-$15,000 to do that. If most people have $15,000, I think a lot of people wouldn't be trying to meet Susan. The amount of Susan meetings related to finances is very high. So I don't think that most people would choose to meet Susan if they had the amount of money they need to go. That being said, if you are inspired by his content to go meet Susan and you can't afford the way that he's suggesting, what do people do? They get dupes. So they'll go to the next option, which is typically way more dangerous. And I don't want to give people ideas because that would be the opposite of this content, but that's not okay. It's like when people they get a prescription medication and then they go and they get a street version because they can't afford the prescription anymore or their doctor cut them off. This is the same level. This is the same thing. So it's very careless, very reckless for you to advocate for a very specific way. First of all, you shouldn't be advocating for any way of anybody doing it. And he does say, well, this is just me and my journey. But you have 500,000 followers. I'm not taking that. Oh, no. Nah. You have 500,000 followers. It's reckless for you to talk about doing something that's very unattainable in a way and make it look fashionable, make it look reasonable, make it look sensible, and even logical. That's not okay. Now, I don't think anyone should be a mental health influencer. I think that we should all be advocating for people to have accessible mental health care. We can all be transparent about our journey, but I do not think your platform should ever be your mental health journey. Having your mental health be just intrinsically bound to the success of your content is never good, because the whole thing is people love a shit show. And people will be there for when you crash out, and then they won't care when things go good. They'll still be subscribed and they won't care. I can say for sure that probably a lot of people followed Joseph to see the end. And now there isn't one. So people are starting to unfollow him.
Editing Diane again, I just wanted to show you guys his social blade. So if you look at the very beginning of the month, which is when people started being like, hey, is this going to happen? People started unfollowing because he also started dropping hints of, not doing it. Then we kind of skip a couple weeks because he was like, I'm depressed or something like that. Then at the end of the month, boom, people start dropping because this is when he announced that he was engaged and stuff like that. If you look at his social blade, he was overall it's minus 11,000 followers this past month. If you look at the times that I have circled, it's minus 17,000 followers, but I guess he gained 6,000 to kind of counteract it. So just so you guys know.
What happens when your platform starts fluctuating and people start leaving because you're doing good? It's going to mess up your mental health again. And then it's an up and down cycle. Nobody's platform should be solely their mental health and what is going on with it. That is so detrimental to you as the influencer. Do not ever do that. I cannot emphasize enough. Don't do that. That should not be your whole platform. You need to have something else going on. People should be interested in what's going on with you, not what's going on specifically with your mental health. Then I want to go on and say, people who talk about their mental health, we have a responsibility to be accountable for how we talk about our mental health. For me, I am always very sure to make sure I put trigger warnings. I'm also very sure to make sure I talk about alternatives. And I'm also sure to make sure I talk about accessible ways to do things. I do not sit there and say, oh, this medication sucked. And if you're on this, no. Not my business to talk about you and your medication journey. I also very much emphasize that this is me and my journey, and this is something that's very specific to me. So if medication doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for me. That's it. It could also work in a couple weeks. I don't know. Journeys and recoveries are very up and down. They're not linear. So I think he avoids accountability by saying, I'm just a troubled soul. I'm just a troubled person. No, you have 500,000 people looking at what you post. That is not okay for you to not take the accountability of how you talk about what you're going through. As I actually cannot stand that one bit. If you were active in the mental health community, in the recovery community, if you went to group therapy or anything like that, again, I talk about process group. And I talk about how we are very careful around our words because we know that we're in a room with other people who are struggling. And even if we're feeling better, we know what it was like to feel bad. And I feel like he does not have that. And I feel like he does not hold account. I think he thinks he's better, or not better. I think he thinks he's one off and singular. And as much as he says, I meet so many people who are going through the same journey as me, I don't think he thinks he's the same as y'all. I don't think that he thinks he's the same as anybody who he's met at all. I think he thinks he's different. And for that, I think that he doesn't get into the community, and he doesn't get into the mental health community in a way that he's not the famous person. He's never just been somebody who's at a meeting. If you had there's people, they talk about the yoga, and then Russell Brand never went to yoga as just a regular person. He went to yoga as Russell Brand the whole time. Joseph has never entered a mental health space as just Joseph. He's never entered a group space where you're accountable and beholden to and responsible for and respectful of other people and their journey and how you can trigger other people in a way that he's not Joseph awuah-darko, who has his platform. He's always been the star or the center when he goes into places. I think that's the difference. And that's why he's not accountable or responsible for how and what he does and what he says on his posts. This and what I feel like Joseph does is akin to that 13 Reasons Why effect. And for this reason, I'm happy that he did not meet Susan, or he has not met Susan. He said that he decided that he's not doing it. So I'm happy that he didn't, because it would have done what 13 Reasons Why is. And the 13 Reasons Why effect is that when 13 Reasons Why came out on Netflix in April 2017, teen meetings with Susan shot up almost 30% just from that show being out. That's a lot. It increased the most that it had in the past 5 years because of a show, because of a TV show. Imagine a person for the past 8 months cranking out content that is aesthetically pleasing of meeting Susan.
Another insert from editing Diane. I just wanted to show the Google Trends for searches during this time. So in November it peaked, and I don't know if you guys remember at the beginning I said that there had been some articles in the New York Times and Washington Post about medically assisted meetings with Susan. So that makes sense. It peaked in November because that's right before I started seeing Joseph's content. And then it also peaked again now, when I'm not saying that Joseph is the only person who might be causing it to trend. I'm just saying that there's a trend.
If you are not in a community with people and not talking with people, and I'm not talking about one-on-one conversation, I'm talking about a group of people that you've never met before from different walks of life, and you have to sit there and think, I don't want to say something that's triggering to John because John has 2 kids. You know what I'm saying? If you've never been in that setting, you cannot understand how that feels. You can't 100% can't. And I think this is pretty much my last point, but I think that that's not okay. And no one's mental health should be the center of their content. And I hope that Joseph pivots away from kind of this disingenuous, weird, almost, it feels like now, because he's pivoting his content so suddenly because he's not meeting Susan, it almost feels like this was a grift. And I can see why people think that he's a scammer.
Okay, so one last thing. I just wanted to add that Joseph at one point was trying to write a book. I don't know if he still is, but I will say that that contributes to this idea that maybe he was grifting and that this was not a genuine situation. Again, This is just speculation. I don't necessarily feel like that. I do feel like he genuinely has bipolar disorder and was genuinely suffering. I just think that this content, again, is harmful. So that's it. I'm not judging him.
But yeah, I'm happy he's moving away from this. I want to just briefly talk about somebody who came up when I was talking about this, and this is actually a person who did meet Susan, and his name is Billy Watts, and he did in the short time, which I just want to say also, I'm like, bro, like for anybody who has been ideating meeting Susan, I'm like 8 months. You waited 8 months? That's insane. That doesn't even seem realistic. I can't. I used to have this tactic when I was like actively trying to meet Susan that I had 48 hours to find something that I wanted to live for. And for bro to like put off this meeting with Susan for 8 months, that doesn't even seem realistic. But again, I'm not going to go into whether that's real or not. That's not my business. But there was a kid named Billy, and he actually did Instagram his journey. And I just want to pay respect to him because he came up while I was doing research and me and my friends talking about this. And I like somebody said, was Joseph trying to do what Billy did, but on a larger scale for a longer time? Because after Billy passed away, his Instagram got flooded with followers and people started listening to his music. So it's like, did Joseph try to do that? And then at the end be like, hey, the Susan was the friends we made along the way. I can't say that. I can't say for sure. That's not my place. But I can say that I don't think that Joseph's content was healthy for him or for anybody looking at it who was in a mental health negative space. Yes, there are people who were like, you inspired me to keep going, but there's also a lot of people who did not speak up, who possibly were inspired in the opposite way. Also, if his stuff is just kind of passively on your algorithm and it's about that, then you probably ended up getting exposed to more things that were surrounding Susan and depression and stuff like that. So that's all I'm going to say before I get too impassioned about it. Joseph, good job for still living. Congratulations on getting engaged. I'm happy that this video wasn't as angry as I actually was throughout this process. And I hope that you don't block me. So, y'all have a good one. Bye.